Welcome, my name is Lloyd Daley and we are here today to celebrate the 70th birthday of my father, Cecil Daley. So sit back, relax and join me on this journey celebrating the last 70 years. Cecil Alfonso Daley was born on the 16th of August 1942. He grew up in Kingston, Jamaica and was the third of four children to John and Esther Daley. Cecil's early life was one of enjoyment and mischief, and although he lost his father early on in his life, he grew up with a sense of responsibility and knowing what was right from wrong. In those days, the life of a mischievous youth was a dangerous one. If you got in trouble at school, there was no running home to your parents, as that would only get you a further beating. After leaving school and starting a trade, a youthful Cecil started to take notice of the fashion scene and the dance scene. About this time he met my mother Mavis and was known amongst his peers as Pretty Teat for the amount of gold he had in his mouth. He got somewhat of a rude boy reputation, which wasn't helped by the fact in 1959 his first daughter Paulette arrived. Such was his sense of responsibility, Cecil knew he had to do something special in order to look after Paulette and any family he would have in the future. He soon followed the footsteps of his elder sister Dorothy and his elder brother Oswald and travelled to England to seek his fortune. Paulette was to spend the early years of her life with her grandmother, like so many other children of her generation. Arriving in England in early 1960 via Madeira in Portugal, Cecil soon found work and saved up enough money to send for his childhood sweetheart Mavis in late 1960. England in the early 60s was a rough place for many of the West Indian immigrants who travelled to seek their fortune. They were greeted with the now famous signs of no blacks, no Irish and no dogs. Cecil, however, was undeterred and, as well as working, soon started his studies in the evening in electrical engineering. As well as financial hardships, the weather was particularly severe for the newly found Jamaicans to our shores. In 1961, there's a famous story, which was very funny, of Mum crying and saying she had enough and wanted to go home as she attempted to get home in deep snow. The story goes that Cecil actually gave Mum a piggy bank all the way from Willesden back to their room in Harlesden. To add to the financial and weather hardships of the early 1960s, in late 1962 saw the arrival of their first male child, Clive, who was born in December. As if things weren't hard enough for young black Jamaicans in the early 60s, having a child would make them virtually impossible. However, Cecil's work ethic got them through and he continued to work and study throughout the early 60s. Clive recalls many funny stories during that time, one in particular where Cecil was taken to lunch by one of his fellow workers on a building site. His friend Paddy ordered Welsh rarebit for lunch, and thinking this sounded very appetising, Cecil also ordered the same. When the order arrived, Cecil spent 2 minutes looking for the rabbit and concluded that melted cheese on toast smelt foul and he's never eaten it since. On the theme of toasted bread, never give Cecil the back of a bread, as this is seen to him as the ultimate insult. As the 60s progressed, more and more young Jamaicans came to these shores, and with it they brought more and more of their culture. I think this led to things becoming a little bit easier, even if money was still tight. In 1966 saw the arrival of their second son, Derek. The swinging 60s were in full swing by now, and whilst the week was spent working hard, the weekend was spent partying, and the music scene was one that Cecil paid great attention to. Cecil started his own sound system, and now every weekend was spent playing music somewhere, and now no doubt getting into further mischief. In 1968 saw the fourth child being born, Lloyd, that's me, and the children now were coming thick and fast. By this time Mavis had insisted on somewhere for her children to live, and the now famous 444 North Circular Road had already been purchased. Rooms had to be let out to make ends meet, as things were still tough financially. As the decade approaches its end, Cecil then set out to achieve his greatest goal to date. He had often asked Mavis to marry him, but she always came up with a reason, usually one of a financial nature. The story goes that one day he came home and told Mavis that he was taking her and the children and emigrating to Canada. However, in order to do so, they had to be married. In the autumn of 1970, one of the biggest weddings in northwest London took place, as Cecil finally got his girl. Funnily enough, after the wedding, no mention was ever made of emigrating to Canada.
When she walks in the neighborhood, everybody turn and stare.
The early 70s saw the completion of the family, with Paulette arriving from Jamaica in 1971, Brian being born in May 1972, and Jean arriving in November 1973. By this time Cecil had completed his qualifications and had qualified as an electrical engineer. He was still working hard, and as Paulette recalls, weekends were time for the family. The partying had got maybe a little bit quieter, and Sundays were spent watching Cecil play cricket for his local club. 1979 saw Cecil's mother arrive from Jamaica, and I think this relaxed him a little bit more. Much of the 80s was spent continuing to work hard, and now the weekends were spent with a more select group of friends and family just enjoying the weekend.
Stick by me, I'll stick by you. Stick by me.
Cecil always strove to teach his children honesty, respect and integrity, and often taught us lessons through actions, not words. Brian recalls a time when he took some chocolate which he wasn't supposed to, and rather than say anything, all that happened is on the following Friday, when pocket money was being dished out, instead of the usual £1, Brian received just 1 penny, and the cost of the chocolate was deducted.
I cry too, oh, stick by me, and I'll stick by you.
While Cecil grew up his sons in a disciplined manner, basically we were scared of him, this was a different story for his daughters. In particularly Jean, who remembers Cecil as somebody she could just manipulate to get what she wanted. He always stood up for me against my horrible big brothers, she remembers, and even to this day will basically do anything she asks. This further softening towards the younger generation was completed in the mid-80s when Cecil was the proud recipient of his first 3 grandchildren, with Gemma, Aisha and Khalid being born. 1989 saw Cecil return to Jamaica for the first time, a trip he enjoyed, but a trip that ultimately decided that he would never return to Jamaica to live. The 1990s saw a new chapter in Cecil's life in the form of religion. Like anything he does it wholeheartedly, and the 1990s saw baptisms, pilgrimages and also return to the classroom. A degree in theology was quickly followed by a master's degree in theology, and towards the late 1990s, Cecil was ordained. This enables Cecil to perform a number of christenings for the plethora of grandchildren that were now being produced. Cecil continues to play an active role in his community and is a well-respected member of the church. In 1992, Cecil retired from full-time work and today continues to enjoy his retirement with his wife, children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. As we come to the end of this short trip down memory lane, I cannot emphasise enough the amount of material, stories and tributes that I've had to omit from this short DVD. In life, it's not about what you have, but it's all about what you become. And I can honestly say that I've never heard a bad word said about Cecil. Words such as hard-working, honesty and integrity have been synonymous with Cecil, and I for one regard him as my hero. The story doesn't end here. After 70 years, we wish him many, many more years in the future, and I give you Cecil Daley.
All I know this world to me, Well, there are some folk who looking long for this world's riches. Oh yes, there's some folk who look for power, position too. Oh yes, but I have a Christ all in my life. This makes me happy, and oh, He's all and all this world to me. Christ is all. Well, He's everything.